it hurt a little bit. That's the way it goes. And
Vince Carter did not feud for headlines. When he took something personally, it usually came from the court, the locker room, or a decision that changed a franchise. These 5 names trace the moments that hardened his edge. We're starting with his most complicated rivalry, and that's Tracy McGrady.
I didn't get as much as playing time as he did. It was Vince Carter's show.
Carter and McGrady arrived in Toronto a year apart and looked like a decade-long partnership waiting to happen. Carter's shot-making and star power with McGrady's length and creation felt complementary, and the franchise finally had a young core that drew crowds and hope. Then, free agency hit the summer of 2000, and McGrady chose Orlando. Toronto lost a rising co-star, and Carter lost the teammate who knew his game best. The exit cut deeper than a routine move because it lived inside family ties and inside a locker room that had just tasted momentum. The fallout was immediate. Carter stepped into a heavier usage role while the Raptors scrambled to retool. Media framed the split as cousins at odds, and the narrative stuck because the timing mattered. Toronto had reached its first playoffs in 2000 and looked set to climb. McGrady's departure reset the climb and placed a target on Carter as the lone headliner. He embraced the load, but the sense of being left behind never fully faded in that moment. The on-court meetings kept the bruise fresh. Orlando handed McGrady the keys, and he erupted into scoring titles and all-NBA seasons. Every matchup with Toronto or with Carter's later teams carried a subtext about who won the split. McGrady's high-usage isolation game hunted switches and mid-post touches that dared single coverage. Carter answered with pull-ups, back cuts, and late-clock jumpers that he lived on in Toronto and refined in New Jersey. They did not need to glare to tell the story. The stat lines and shot charts did the talking.
I know his moves.
There was history helping the tension along. In February 2000, the two shared the All-Star Saturday stage in Oakland. Carter's dunk contest run is the one everyone remembers, but McGrady was on the floor as a finalist and as a lob partner, catching and throwing while living inside the same spotlight. That night looked like a blueprint for a shared future. Months later, the blueprint was gone. When a city sees the league light up to 2 players at once and then watches one leave, it remembers. Carter's injuries and Toronto's inconsistency only sharpened the sting. He missed stretches in 2001 and 2 and carried the label of a star who needed help to sustain playoff pushes. McGrady, meanwhile, turned into a nightly 30 without a deep playoff run of his own. The split became a referendum that neither man could completely control. Carter's camp could say winning rounds mattered more. McGrady's camp could say peak value and individual dominance proved the bet was right. Fans treated each regular season duel like a verdict. Time eventually cooled the edges. They reconciled publicly, spoke well of each other, and leaned into the truth that careers are long and choices are complicated. That never erases the first act. Carter felt the weight of a franchise the moment McGrady left. He shouldered expectations, boos, and the responsibility to validate Toronto on national TV without the partner everyone expected. That is exactly the kind of moment that hardens an athlete's view of another player. It is not spite for the sake of a headline. It is the memory of a door closing, written into years of matchups and questions. Call it rivalry, call it family friction. The feeling was real because the stakes were real. Toronto's rise paused. Orlando vaulted a young star to the front of the league, and 2 cousins found themselves on opposite ends of what could have been a dynasty-in-the-making storyline. For Carter, that summer turned a partnership into a score to settle, from family feuds to serious rivalries. The next person on our list is Bruce Bowen.
Last season, Carter with the Raptors pulls up for the J, gets clipped.
The friction was built on landings. Vince Carter believed Bowen slid under jump shooters and took away safe space to come down. Early in 2005, during a Nets-Spurs game, Carter told officials Bowen had taken out his feet the previous season and that he was watching for it. The complaint set the tone before the fourth quarter ever arrived. That night became the flashpoint. Carter erupted for 43 points through 3 quarters, then got tossed after a second technical in the fourth, following a leg tangle with Bowen. The Spurs closed it out while Carter fumed, and game stories made the subtext explicit. Carter was enraged because he believed Bowen had undercut him the year before and effectively ended his season. Whether anyone agreed with his diagnosis or not, that's how he felt, and how the broadcast framed his anger. New York papers captured his position the next morning. Carter said he had warned the crew about Bowen's tactics, pointing back to an earlier incident he felt the league never addressed. The idea wasn't new. Around the league, shooters had long accused Bowen of getting too close on the way down. Carter's frustration simply spilled over first and loudest on a night when he had everything working. The history stretched back years. There are clips of Carter boiling against San Antonio, even in his Toronto days, and photos of him navigating Bowen's body angles in low-scoring slugfests. The pattern rarely changed. Carter rose into pull-ups. Bowen closed late, body square and feet creeping forward. Both hit the floor irritated. The league hadn't yet emphasized landing space the way it would a decade later, which meant most of these actions lived in a gray area that rewarded the defender's timing and tolerance for complaints. Carter's anger wasn't only about one play. In his mind, it linked to durability and reputation. He had already lost a season in Toronto to knee surgery, and every awkward landing invited the same nightmare. When a defender takes a half step under a shooter, there's no box score entry that captures the risk, just an ankle waiting to roll. Carter's argument was simple: call it early or someone gets hurt. Contemporary game reports reflect that urgency in how they summarized his post-game mood. Bowen, for his part, leaned into the persona of a meticulous stopper who lived on the edge. Years later, he'd critique scorers like Carter and Tracy McGrady for settling for jumpers, a neat window into how he sized them up. To him, the job was to crowd comfort and take away rhythm. If that meant heat for being too close, he wore it and kept contesting. That stance only hardened Carter's view that the contact wasn't an accident, it was the plan. The box scores from that February 2005 meeting explain why it boiled over in public. Carter had the Spurs solved for 3 quarters. San Antonio turned the game with timely threes while Carter argued with officials, and once he was ejected, the math flipped. In the following weeks, previews circled the rematch as Bowen versus Vince Round 2, with Carter reiterating that he'd warned refs in advance. The narrative had escaped both players and become a league talking point. Context matters here. Bowen's reputation as a line stepper wasn't built on Carter alone. By the mid-2000s, a list of elite wings had compiled grievances over feet sliding under jumpers and knees, appearing at awkward heights on contests. Carter's case stood out because his best Nets performance in that game collided with the one type of defense he trusted least. It looked to him like an avoidable risk masquerading as hustle. Writers at the time said as much in roundups of Bowen's more controversial plays. What remained between them was residue. Every Spurs meeting for years carried the memory of that ejection and the belief, on Carter's side, that Bowen had crossed a line that endangered his season and his career. Every closeout from Bowen arrived with boos and side-eye from shooters who had watched the tape. Neither needed a headline to keep it alive. The next contest would bring it back on its own. So when you map Vince Carter's deepest grudges, Bruce Bowen is on the board for concrete reasons: a high-profile ejection, a player's stated fear about unsafe landings, and a defender whose style lived in the narrow space between legal and reckless. Carter treated that space as a threat. Bowen treated it as his office. The clash was inevitable, and it lingered long after the buzzer. From tricky closeouts to outright collisions, the temperature spiked with Latrell Sprewell and the 2000 Knicks.
Lineups after the Raptors.
Latrell Sprewell turned the Knicks-Raptors series into a fistfight in suits. Toronto came in wide-eyed and excited for its first playoff run. New York brought muscle memory from recent trips to June. The gap showed up in the final minutes of Game 1 at the Garden, when the pace slowed, elbows sharpened, and every cut turned into a test. With the Knicks clinging to a one-possession lead, Sprewell wrenched Carter to the floor on a drive for a flagrant foul. Carter went to the line with a chance to flip momentum. He split the free throws, then missed at the rim after the ensuing inbounds. New York bled out the clock and the tone for the series was set. Game 2 pushed the same buttons. Carter bounced back from a brutal opener and spent most of the night answering every Knicks surge. Sprewell matched him, then raised him in winning time. He scored 13 points in the last 6 minutes and hit the go-ahead shot with Carter guarding on 5 fouls. A clean isolation to the right that turned the scoreboard and the building. The Knicks took a 2-0 lead to Toronto behind Sprewell's shot-making and their collective willingness to absorb contact and keep coming. The box score told you what your eyes already knew. Game 2 featured 60 fouls and 39 free throws, a parade that rewarded the team that lived in the mud longer. New York's vets turned every post touch into a crowd and every catch into a wrestling match. Toronto's counters looked bright in stretches, especially when Carter got into early offense, but late possessions slowed and devolved into contested jumpers and collisions at the rim. Spruill thrived in that mess. He chased, bumped, and then rose over contests like the skirmish never happened. Back in Toronto for Game 3, the margins stayed thin. The Raptors had chances to extend the series. The Knicks had answers. Larry Johnson's late banked three pushed New York ahead for good and muted the building. Carter and D. Brown both missed in the next sequence, and the sweep was complete. It read like a veteran's series win. It felt like payback for all the shoves that went unwhistled and all the landings that finished with hands on backs and legs tied up. Carter's side never forgot the flagrant. It marked the pivot from playoff energy to playoff nastiness, and it came from the matchup that followed him everywhere in the final minutes. Spruill had the license to chase him into fatigue, then ask him to defend at the other end. That is what broke Toronto most, the two-way tax. Carter had to be the primary scorer and then the primary stopper when New York flattened the floor for Spruill. One more foul ended his night. Anything soft conceded the shot. It is the classic Stars trap in April, and New York set it perfectly. There was no post-series handshake to make the mood feel friendly. The sweep wrapped, the quotes read like relief from a team that had taken a young star's best shot and thrown him to the ground in the final minute anyway. For Carter, the memory sat somewhere between lesson and scar. He learned how small the window gets in the last 2 minutes of playoff games. He learned which players use that window to press down on nerves and legs. And because it happened in his first postseason, it stuck. Now, let's move on to a legendary series and a legendary rival. We're talking about Allen Iverson.
49 points Iverson, 39 Carter. Iverson.
Game 1 in Philadelphia announced the temperature. Toronto stole home court 96-93, with Carter carving out tough mid-range looks late, while Iverson pressed through traps to keep it close. For a 1 seed that built its identity on defense and pace control, dropping the opener at home raised the stakes immediately. The building knew what was coming, so did both stars. Iverson answered in Game 2 with a performance that still echoes. 47 minutes, 54 points, pull-ups at full speed, step-throughs, runners, and late free throws. The Sixers evened the series and restored a sense of order behind their MVP, but the message was larger than the score. If Toronto wanted a split in Philadelphia, it would have to live through the full Iverson experience. There was no safe coverage, no easy hedge, and no time to relax on a rebound or an outlet. Back in Toronto, Carter matched the explosion with one of the cleanest offensive games of his career. 50 points, 9 threes, 7 assists, only 1 turnover. The Raptors tied the series behind early clock threes and a spread floor that punished every soft close. Iverson kept firing, but Toronto's pace and accuracy made Game 3 feel like a different sport from the previous 2. It was a reminder that this was not a one-man showcase. It was a 2-man race with shifting terrain. By Game 4, the series had settled into a rhythm of punch and counter. Philadelphia climbed back behind offensive rebounding and half-court toughness. Then Game 5 tilted into Iverson's hands again. 52 this time, with the mid-range pull playing off his 3 and the Sixers guards cutting off doubles to give him clean catch-and-shoot rhythm. Toronto's turnovers fed runouts, the building surged, and the 1 seed took control. Game 6 brought it back to even. Toronto adjusted coverages, mixing length on Iverson and trusting Carter to carry more of the early offense so he could create late. The Raptors won, and the series moved back to Philadelphia tied at 3, with a week's worth of highlights and counters on tape. Everyone knew the minutes would shrink in Game 7. Every possession would live at the rim, at the line, or in a star's hands. The day of Game 7 became part of the story. Carter flew to Chapel Hill in the morning to graduate, then returned to Philadelphia for tip. He played poised, rebounded, and moved the ball, but the fourth quarter belonged to defense, whistles, and half-court nerves. Iverson did not replicate his 50s, yet he controlled tempo with passes and patience, piling up assists when traps came. The final possession is the image burned into memory, side out. Carter shakes free to the right wing, rises over a contest, and the jumper rims out at the horn. 76ers 88, Raptors 87. The handshake line felt like a release and a regret at once. Strip the narrative down to the facts and the rivalry reads like a dead heat. Iverson authored two 50-plus masterpieces, averaged north of 33 for the series, and toggled to table setting when the doubles arrived. Carter averaged over 30, dropped a 50 of his own, and repeatedly solved set defenses with quick-trigger threes and straight-line drives. The coaches moved chess pieces around them. Eric Snow and Aaron McKee ate minutes on Carter. Alvin Williams and multiple bodies took turns on Iverson. Dikembe Mutombo's screens and putbacks swung quarters. Antonio Davis answered with deep seals to buy Toronto breathers. It was not hate, it was pressure. Both men carried cities that had never seen a conference finals in their colors. Every miss turned into a debate about shot selection. Every make turned into a debate about who had the edge. By the end, the margins were a single rimmed jumper, and the accumulated weight of 7 games lived in the half court. That is why this duel endures. It was two elite scorers pushing each other to the wall, trading 50s, living with traps, and trusting their work when air thinned. For Carter, it became a career checkpoint that followed him for years. For Iverson, it became the final exam before the finals. For everyone else, it was proof that a rivalry does not need insults to feel personal. The basketball was personal enough. To wrap things up, we need to talk about Alonzo Mourning and his clashes with Vince.
Was there any truth that you guys didn't talk for like 6 or 7 years?
The story begins on November 7, 2005 in Miami. New Jersey pushed a miss up the floor. Vince gathered with a behind-the-back dribble, rose through contact, and hammered over Mourning. It was violent, clean, and unforgettable. Heat players later joked about it, but the building went quiet first. The clip ran for years because it showed Carter's hang time and Mourning's fearlessness meeting at the rim with no escape for either. That was not their first collision. Carter had tested Mourning at the basket since his Toronto days. Miami's center lived to challenge above the square. Carter lived to test any shot blocker's timing. By 2005, both reputations were set. What changed that night was how personal it felt afterward. Carter has said Mourning would not speak to him for 6 or 7 years. The dunk did not end a friendship. It created a frost that lasted through seasons, meetings, and handshakes that never happened. The context matters. Mourning was the league's model for rim protection, a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year who treated paint like property. At 35, returning from serious health setbacks, he still met guards at the summit without apology. Carter was at the tail end of his most explosive years in New Jersey, hunting lobs, pull-ups, and those straight-line takes that left defenders with one choice. When he took off, he aimed high and through. Mourning offered a shoulder and both hands. Carter finished, through both. That one play also lived inside a longer tape. Carter caught Mourning multiple times that season. The Nets and Heat faced each other often, and every game came with a moment where Carter tested the contest or split a help angle to force Mourning into a foul or a block attempt. The poster in November became the headline because it compressed the rivalry into one frame: elevation, strength, contact, and the ball dropping clean. Carter has told the aftermath with a straight face. He said he would see Mourning around the league and get nothing back. No words, no nod, just distance. Years later, they were comfortable enough to laugh about how long the silence lasted and to walk through the sequence together on camera. The heat cooled, but the fact remains that a single dunk froze a relationship between two pros who respected each other's work. There was basketball cost for Miami too. That Nets group needed belief in a hostile building. One play gave it to them. Even when the Heat won the night, the visual belonged to Carter. Fans in Toronto, New Jersey, and later everywhere else kept the clip alive because it captured the precise balance that made Vince unique. He was skilled and patient. He was also willing to go directly through a Hall of Fame shot blocker with the game moving full speed. Vince Carter's fiercest rivalries were born from real moments: a family split, dangerous closeouts, playoff hits, a 7-game shootout, and a poster that iced a handshake for years. That edge powered his career. If you enjoyed this, support the channel, share it with a friend, and stick around for the next deep dive into NBA history on this channel.